Okay, so welcome back to the Vimalakirti Sutra lecture. So we are still in the first chapter. I thought we might finish this year, but no. So we will. This will be the last lecture for this year, because I think a lot of between the two holidays, it tends to be kind of hectic, and people are in town and things like that. So enjoy. And then we'll pick up again in 2018. So we left off, let's see, discussing I think the 8 winds. So we had gone through the 8 winds, the idea of what moves people, what gets us off the spiritual path, what we tend to be very reactionary to. So things like gain and loss, decline, disgrace and honor, what kind of draws us in or really upsets our balance naturally. So moving on from there, the next praise that jewel accumulation gives to the Buddha says, "Now we offer the world-honored one this subtle canopy within which is manifested to use in the Tri-Mega Chillicosm, including the palaces in which the gods and dragons abide, as well as the Gandharvas and Yakshas." So this is kind of an interesting, what is this Tri-Mega Chillicosm? So we go back to quantum mechanics and astrophysics for a moment. So this is, I was debating how deeply to get into this concept, but this gets into Buddhist cosmology quite a bit in terms of how the universe is conceived, and there are considered to be multiple realms and universes within our universe, which at the time the Buddha just talked about this was probably like, wow, far out, man. But now it's something you can turn on, and your Nova or Discovery Channel and things like this will be talking about, and popular physicists and astrophysicists will be discussing. So we're not too far outside the realms of normal day-to-day popular science discourse. But Buddhism, along with Hinduism, postulates a multiverse, that it's more than just our current single universe, and that in fact, if we look at world systems in terms of galaxies, that these are infinite. So really beyond our counting in multitude. And each one has their own mountains and oceans and beings and their unique needs, and a Buddha, an enlightened being there that reacts or responds to their needs or is teaching in that realm. So part of, if you actually look at the symbolism, so if you're reading and you say, well, how come there's this Mount Sumeru and they have the same idea? It's not to be taken quite literally that there is a eastern continent and a western continent and a southern continent. It's they're euphemisms for directionality, so that there is a north, south, east, west, that there are polar directions, and that the entire thing is surrounded by an iron mountain, that there is some boundary to each galaxy or world system, you could say. Maybe we could say that's gravitational waves at some point, or why is our universe kind of has a spiral shape. I think there's a lot of ways that you could explain it in today's terms scientifically, but it has more to do with basic orientation of the human in the system, and then one system to the next system, rather than the Buddhas having enunciated a theory that is on par with what Einstein said. Conceptually, though, you'll find a lot of similarities. So there was never a limitation or idea that our world is it. right? There was always the idea that there was much more. And this concept is both that world systems go in and out of existence, that there will be a new one in the future. So in many ways, you can see a similarity or parity with the Big Bang Theory, that this is constantly a system in flux. So I think that's enough. Otherwise, that's a long rabbit hole to get into. I taught that class once. Yeah. I taught that class once in Hawaii, and it was interesting, and I had diagrams, and I realized I needed more diagrams, and 3 hours was
physicist.
Yeah. 3 hours wasn't enough, and in the middle of it, I was wishing that I had the old classrooms. I had the blackboards that slid, and so you could have more. I needed that, right? I didn't have enough whiteboard space, so. It's actually quite fascinating. The Avatamsaka Sutra goes in depth with regard to different world systems, what those world systems are like, including the heavens. So when I was much younger, this is one of the things that fascinated me about Buddhism, was just the level of detail that was present as compared to what I had available in other religious systems at the time. So it is quite interesting. So relevance depends on where you want to go. If you're flying Pan Am or maybe some other, but I think it does help because there are often conversations in the sutras regarding where a particular teaching took place, or where a particular person or a spiritual being who shows up in the sutra is from. And what I find is very fascinating is, from sutra to sutra to sutra, you have a system that isn't changing. You have the same universe, and then players within it. So that continuity is just quite fascinating in and of itself across a huge body of literature. So.
Could you say in this? I mean, I know there's all this detail, but when they're talking about the universe, it's just like they're speaking in a space. It's not like, what am I trying to say? They're not trying to do science with it. They're
right.
That's just where they find themselves, what they've observed.
Right. So it's not, and I get thank you. That's a really good point. So it's not take the method of explaining it is not from the perspective of a scientist to go do experiments with this. It's from the perspective of the meditator. It's from the perspective of, what do you have insight into with your enlightened mind? And from that perspective, how would you explain it? Rather than let's explain it in terms of, so the point here isn't to explain why large bodies warp space and influence the motion of other bodies, right? Mass and gravity. That's not the point. The point is to understand ideas of compassion and emptiness. When you do look up in the sky and you see a multitude of stars, but also getting at very, very deep insight. And so Buddhism never, Buddhism, you could say in some ways was born into a Hindu world. And it never negated the Hindu philosophies. So it didn't say these gods don't exist. It didn't say these heavens are not real. It says the way you conceive of them, maybe if you looked at it from a slightly different angle, there's another perspective.
Might be more beneficial.
It could be more beneficial. Yeah. And so one of those things was applying the concept of impermanence even to these heavenly realms. So if you look at a religious system as, I'm going to do good things because I want this reward. The Buddha said, well, first of all, if you're doing it for the purpose of the reward, that's not really selfless, even if you think it is, because you want this reward. Second, looking around the universe. So first, your motivation is a bit flawed. And then looking around the universe, what is permanent? Right? And so if looking even in the long arc of geological history and the history of the universe, saying, with this wisdom, I can say world systems come into and out of being. In fact, that's present in the Hindu philosophy teaching. So here you have, gods that whose purpose is to bring world systems into and out of existence. So if that's the case, this heavenly reward that you seek isn't permanent. So then what? So it raises questions. And then what do you do? So from that perspective, you have this, okay, here's how it works. Here's what it's like. And that's where you start to see, even in the heavens, things aren't 100% perfect. Right? So it doesn't matter what Mayan philosophy, Native American, biblical, there's some drama in heaven. Oftentimes, the gods, it looks like Peyton Place. If you've seen that. There's some stuff. Whether it be, Old Testament or Greek or Roman gods, there are times can be very petty, unforgiving in many ways, backstabbing, quite literally. So I think what the Buddha said, well, it might be better in some ways than here. But the Buddha didn't say it doesn't exist. He just said, is that the end? Is that the ultimate? Or could there be more? And I think from that perspective said, let's point further. But between here and the heavenly realms and what could be beyond, well, it's quite fascinating. So there is a benefit to explain that, because I think from a meditator's perspective, if you're very serious about it, then you can say, well, I like this. This is fine, right? So you have to lay out a roadmap so you don't get lost. But at the same time, we have samadhi and dhyana. These two concepts, which in English translation always get muddled up. It's just meditation. But the dhyanas are considered to be identical with the highest levels of heaven. So in many ways, you could say, well, if your meditation is fine-tuned enough, you can have the same experience now as you would have in heaven, and then still see that there's more, rather than waiting for the hope of rebirth in that space. So I think from that perspective, it's a very helpful teaching. But like I said, we could go forever. This is one of those. What do I say? This is one of those. Go get some great jazz albums on vinyl and put on and sit and one long night have a long conversation about all these different realms, and it's very, very interesting. And it really is. I mean, it really is that interesting. But you can also. There was a limit to what the Buddha said, because at some point you just get into you stop practicing and you just, that's fascinating. Ooh, that's neat. And then you don't do anything. You just.
Wasn't that among some of the things that the Buddha just said? I'm not going to talk about it because it's just too distracting, like beginnings and endings and things like that.
Yeah, there's this kind of famous unanswered questions. And it makes a lot of sense. I was actually really frustrated about that in the beginning. I was no, actually it makes a lot of sense, because the question is it helpful or useful to us now? And then other things I think, well, why do we have as much as we do? But it also makes sense that if your meditation is at a level where you have those experiences, you need a roadmap for that. So there were a lot of teachings in the beginning. What is the point of this? Later I said, I completely understand the point of this now. So I say, well, there's a lot of other teachings I don't really understand why we have it. But based on my experience thus far, I either will have the experience in the future and that text becomes necessary, or someone is having that experience and it's necessary for them. So that's another key point within Buddhist practice. Nobody's doing it all. No one's practicing all of it. You have to find out what's relevant for you and kind of go from that perspective. So I will try to keep this commentary shorter, because it's fascinating, but I'm not yet giving out PhDs in Buddhist cosmology or Buddhist astrophysics. So But that would be a fascinating degree, I must say. I will say there's parts of this I'm glossing over right now because we're going to come back to it later for a reason. But remember who's speaking, right? Jewel accumulation comes with these 500 people from the city. He brings these canopies, and the canopies that he brings trigger this scene of all the pure lands and all the worlds coming together. He asks, he's narrating, the world honor one, the subtle canopy within which is manifested to us the trimillennial cosmos, this entire universe of everything, including the palaces in which the gods and dragons abide. Might jewel accumulation be more than meets the eye? Might there be more to him than we may think at the moment? Yes. So suffice it to say, he's coming. In many ways, it's helpful to read this kind of as there's a lot of foreshadowing. I feel like this would be very good parallel reading of Shakespeare. But there's a lot of foreshadowing here in terms of who he is and why these questions are being asked. So moving on to the next one. So we see all that transpires in the world as he of the 10 powers compassionately manifests these transformations. The congregation has observed this rare event and all exclaimed in praise of the Buddha. And now we bow our heads to the honored one of the triple world. So some of this is very obvious. So we see the Buddha's attainment and we're in awe of it and we show respect to it. But it says the 10 powers. So what are the 10 powers? What is it why should you become enlightened? And what will it do for you? So the 10 powers get at what differentiates a Buddha from a Bodhisattva. Other than being enlightened, what does that mean? So of these are the 10 powers. So what is that? Being able to see what is right or wrong in every condition, right? No matter what. This would be very helpful if you're driving around before GPS. Should we go left or right? Oh, definitely left. Are you sure? Oh yes, I'm sure. So no matter what the condition, knowing the right or wrong. But this is also, we really fret about this. Sometimes we say, I need to make a decision. I'm trying to make the best decision, but I don't know how it's going to turn out. And so one of the benefits of being enlightened is not only do you see, just conditions, but also, almost like little strings or fibers coming into every person, all of the karma of a person, so that if a person is going to do something, you see exactly how it's going to play out in real time. That's probably a lot to handle. So, of course, the background of this is you have the emotional capacity to handle that as well. So that's the first one. Second one, what is the karma of every being, past, present, and future? Right. So we are a snapshot in time of everything that we have done in the past, everything we're currently doing, and all the decisions we're making into the future. So being able to see all of that at once is one of the 10 powers. So I always visualize this as little threads, little silk threads coming in and then going out, and then like all the possible, roads you could travel. But one's a little bit brighter, so they see that's where you're going. And you change, and maybe the other one lights up. And you go out. For some reason, that's the way I see it. The third one is all stages of dhyana, liberation, and samadhi. So the depth and quality of your meditation, they can see. That is interesting. Imagine you go to a meditation retreat, there's 200 people meditating, and the teacher sees the quality of every person. That person's really meditating. That person's just daydreaming. But outwardly, right, no difference.
But sometimes teachers can.
Absolutely, yeah. So I shouldn't say that having all 10 is limited to being a Buddha. Having some of them is not limited to being a Buddha. So definitely, you can see there are people who see that quality now. The one that is definitely restricted, is seeing the karma, the individual karma, past, present, and future, in complete clarity. So that comes up often, especially in Asia or the Asian diaspora, with relation to Buddhism. Because people want to know who has the heavenly eye, who can see. Chinese, the Shentong, who has that ability, that psychic ability. So some lineages request that you not display it if you have it, because it tends to, people tend to only come for that. But that is, that tends to be looked for in certain communities, or that's highly prized. But it's considered from the Buddhist standpoint to just be a side effect. That's just something that happens with a lot of meditation. So it's not, some people have it naturally, like they have insight like that, but it's always, unless you're fully enlightened, there's still a limitation. So you may not be 100% right, which is still maybe impressive though. Oh, he's 80% right though. That's pretty good. But I won't talk too much about spiritual powers. Okay. The fourth one, the stages and faculties of all being. The powers and faculties of all being. So not only seeing, having that insight or spiritual ability, that siddhi for yourself, but also seeing other people's spiritual insight and ability too. So some of this starts to sound like Marvel superhero movie stuff, but this was long considered to be just natural human ability that can be developed. I think we see it less, or people are more or less interested because we further away from nature, we have less quiet time, and we're a lot busier. Right? In the old days, when the sun went down, you had to stop working. Now we can keep going. So, and some of our jobs require us to keep going, or to be constantly staring at a small screen and responding and being very, like our world ends right here. You know, the world at thumb length. So, the fifth one is the desires or moral directions of every being. So seeing everyone's motivations. Definitely something that maybe we don't want to see all the time now. The actual condition, karmic condition of every living being, every individual. Number 6. 7, the direction and consequences of all laws of phenomena. Right. So getting on a plane and having complete insight into the fuel load, the turbulence, right? Every single level of phenomena, you know, the butterfly in Mongolia that flaps its wings, and seeing the chain of events, having complete insight. 8, all causes of morality and good and evil in their reality, right? So seeing very clearly the positive and negative, or the intention behind actions. That one can be scary, especially in Dharma. That can be very scary in Congress. The end of all beings and nirvana, right? So how, not only how your life ends currently, but how, this is where you see in many sutras the Buddha giving predictions of future enlightenment. So seeing, you know, people's, the actual ends, right? If it's, you're an airplane and your fuel, seeing exactly where you're going to go and how far, and you know what type of being you end up as. And then 10, the destruction of all illusion of every kind, right? Seeing through all illusory phenomena, thought processes, everything. So there's quite a bit of insight, right, if you're fully enlightened. So some of these we may run into people now that have that. Some of them we may not recognize. Some we may say, oh, I'm glad I didn't run into anyone like that, because I don't want anyone to know that much about me. But those are the 10 powers. So 11. So in the text they're numbered. It says, you, the great sage and Dharma king, are the refuge of the congregation, who purify their minds in contemplating the Buddha, all of them in ecstasy. They each see the world-honored one in front of himself through the exclusive attributes of the Buddha's numinous power. So this gets at, what is it like to sit in front of an enlightened being and be taught? And it's likened to, it's actually the experience of the teaching. So if you're watching online, you don't have the experience of, right, the temperature, the incense, the candlelight, there's something you miss. Right? You don't have the camaraderie. You don't have our fine tea. Right? There's something that's missed. There's a quality that's missed. So that's natural for any recorded thing, or even if you're the difference between 50-yard line seats at the Super Bowl versus watching it on TV, or if you're in the nosebleed section, right? The experience is different. So here, though, it's saying that if you are before a Buddha being taught, it's as if that Buddha or that teacher is speaking directly to you, and you're face to face with them, as if there's no one else there. So their words speak to you directly. So we say that sometimes, like, that really spoke to me. But the experience is like everything they say is just straight to you, right, directly. So that is an intangible quality that's present whenever the teaching's being given. I also think it lends itself to why the teaching was so remembered, right? Because it was a very deeply personal experience for the people who were present. Sometimes we have that experience. Something touches us very deeply. Someone speaks in a manner that is so evocative that you can actually see what they're talking about. I've been to a few talks. I remember I went to a talk about a person who was an environmentalist, and they were talking about being in the Galapagos Islands and swimming and seeing all the natural world and fish and everything in the ocean. And the way it was described, first you could tell it was very personal and very important to them, but you could see it. I had a very clear mental picture. So I cannot say the same is true for every lecture I've been to or every class I've been in. So, but it said that's what it's like, right? So I think in that way, it makes more sense why, the early disciples had, this deep memory of the Buddha's words and teaching. It touched every time he spoke. It was, very deeply touching in a different way than we have now. So 12. The Buddha explains the Dharma with one sound, and sentient beings each attain understanding according to their capacity. Each one says the world of honor one is speaking to his own language through the exclusive attributes of the Buddha's numinous power. So I'm going to skim this explanation a little bit because it's very similar to the one I just said, but not only do you see it and feel it, but, the person is speaking your own language. No, actual physical language, or the words touch you in a way that, you feel that they speak your language, meaning they really understand the words you need to hear. I think probably a little bit of both, but I think definitely having heard Dharma teachings in multiple languages, there are times when I didn't understand 100% of the lecture. Sometimes I'm like, I'm only getting about 30% of this, but I got the feeling of this. I got the emotion. I found myself laughing at the same time as everyone else, even though maybe the actual word-for-word translation was only 40%, 60%. So that, I think, I've had that experience. But here it's, every word. So 13. And 13 is very similar to the other ones. The Buddha preaches the Dharma with one sound, and sentient beings each understand accordingly. Everyone accepts and practices it and receives its benefit through the exclusive attribute of the Buddha's numinous power. So not only do you understand it, not only do you feel like you're touched by it, but you are benefited by it. So you leave this lecture and, I'm changing my life now. I'm going to do this now. Right? It's not just like, oh, that was really wonderful. Let's get coffee. Like, no, let's go. We're going to go do this. So, the Buddha preaches the Dharma. Oh, I read that one. So 15. So it says, we bow our heads to him of the 10 powers and great exertion. We will bow our heads to him who has achieved fearlessness. We bow our heads to him residing in the exclusive attributes. We bow our heads to the great guide of all. So we have a little bit of, again, this praising language. But I think oftentimes when we use this sort of language today, we're not so genuine. I think when dual accumulation is saying it, it's very genuine. But it's also said for the benefit of the other people who are there. right? Just in case you don't realize how good this opportunity is, how precious this opportunity is, this is how he feels about it. So this is how we should really look at things. So he says, we bow our heads to him of the 10 powers and great exertion. So it's separating this into two. So someone who is able to eradicate things of our world, our life, such as the 8 winds, right? Somebody who has mastery over these, not moved. And on the other hand, is eradicating all of the obstacles faced by bodhisattvas, right? So the bodhisattvas still have some practice left. They still have some polishing left to do. And so our obstacles are, you could say, very gross, very obvious. They're like just a boulder. And so you just go around it. But the bodhisattva's obstacle or remaining hindrance may be very, very fine or subtle. And so if the Buddha's lecturing about that very, very fine or subtle obstacle, it's not much use to us when we're like, but I have this big boulder in front of me. I don't care about that. I don't know if this huge boulder. So within a lot of teaching, sometimes, again, in the West, things get translated and it's on the shelf and we're reading it potentially out of context for ourselves. So we have to ask, is it relevant to our current condition? Or is this teaching focused on a more fine-grained, very nuanced obstacle of rhetoric or deep Buddhist philosophy? And in many ways, this is why we went over the Heart Sutra at the beginning. The Heart Sutra is getting at that very fine-grained obstacle. So who's meditating in the Heart Sutra? It's not Shariputra, it's not one of the Buddhist disciples, it's not Bodhisattva. So the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara was practicing profound prajnaparamita, right? So that means Avalokitesvara, Guanyin, Kannon has already done so much teaching, so much learning, so much practice. And so only then, now I'm without fear, right? Now I'm without obstruction in mind. So that teaching as let me study this to understand Buddhism may not be relevant to the person who's like, trying to meditate for the first time and my hips are hurting.
MC squared,
yes.
When you don't know anything about physics, right?
Yeah. Equals MC squared. What's 2 + 2? I don't know. But tell me more about physics, right? So that's why, so oftentimes, why do we practice it rather than study it? So we practice it to get the benefit. We practice as a mantra, as something that kind of slowly permeates us. But to pick it up and say, okay, word by word, let's go through this text, it's not necessarily the best starting place. So this is where you see it used as practice rather than textbook. So now I have to also rant about the modern mindfulness movement. So rather than taking meditation into the level of the Heart Sutra, rather than getting into the obstacles of the 8 winds, rather than saying what are these 10 powers, the modern mindfulness movement stops at the parasympathetic nervous system response and said that's it. So you have this fight or flight mechanism, you have a stressful job, and so the minute you begin to slow down and breathe, your body feels better. And so now, yes, you can focus more clearly. And that's where the meditation stops, right? At that stress relief response, the endorphin rush. And it oftentimes doesn't even bother to say, if you'd like to get more, there is more. It leaves sometimes people with the impression that that is it, that's the end. So it turns meditation into just another component of do your cardio, eat this way, these fashionable clothes, and some meditation, and then you'll be very successful in your career.
There's an app for that, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure there is an app for that.
Count your steps and count your mindfulness.
Yeah. That'll be the next.
No, it's there in the app.
I'm sure it is.
Go look. Yeah.
I'm sure it is, yeah. That'll probably be the next thing. You'll get your readout in the morning of, this is how good your sleep was, this is how good your meditation was.
Already there.
Right. So what it can't measure is how well you navigate life. It can't measure how your practice helps you respond to the emotional needs of a coworker, friend, or family member. It can't. There's no measurement for that. Those are intangibles. But what do we want out of life? Almost everything is intangible. Oh, we want some. I saw a Ferrari earlier today. I was like, maybe I'll get one of.
Now you really took it out of my mind. But,
Yeah.
like, Ferrari, right?
Ferrari.
Not that but it's a symbol. It's a really powerful symbol.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
I pegged you as a Ferrari man. That's fine. Reminds me in cars. I like the Ferraris. See, he knows. So that's and that's okay, right? It's completely okay to have that benefit, to enjoy that benefit, to use that benefit. But there is more, and we need more, right? We are not just a vehicle upon which fine clothing is placed so that we can accumulate money and then contribute to the economy. That's soul crushing. So anyway, I'll stop editorializing. So 16. So we bow our heads to him who can eradicate our fetters. We bow our heads to him who has arrived at the other shore. We bow our heads to him who can save beings in all the worlds. We bow our heads to him who has eternally transcended the realm of samsara. So I think at this point that needs no explanation, so I'll just keep going. You understand the past and future characteristics of sentient beings, and well have you attained emancipation with regard to the dharmas. Unattached in the world, like the lotus flower growing out of the mud, you always enter well into the practice of empty serenity. So in this section, it really gets at the Buddha's specific powers to see and understand the karma of all individuals, regardless of. Remember, it says sentient beings, not just people. So, and then 18, you have attained the characteristics of the Dharma without hindrance, and we bow our heads to him who relies on nothing like space. So the sutra goes on at this point with the Buddha praising jewel accumulation for this teaching. So this is jewel accumulation actually offering a teaching to the congregation, to the people assembled. So next it gets into the benefit, and then of course jewel accumulation has a question, right? So again, almost all the sutras start with a question, or there's this question and answer portion. So usually someone asks the Buddha a question and there's an answer, but oftentimes the question, in many ways, it's like the person's moved to ask the question because they're moved in a way that it's going to be a benefit to more than just themselves. And we've probably had that experience. I'm going to ask this because I think it's a really good, So this is happening all the time in the sutras. It's not just one person going, I wonder if, But here in the Vimalakirti Sutra, we have it a little bit more explicitly stated as to the motivation of the questioner. So we get to see that. So pay attention to the form of the question. Pay attention to the manner of asking the question. That's all good to look at when we see this. So here's the question. When the elder son, jewel accumulation, finished speaking this verse, he addressed the Buddha, world honored one, these 500 elder sons have all generated the attention to achieve Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, complete, perfect enlightenment. So we talked about that earlier, right? That shows up in the Heart Sutra. We wish to hear of the purity of the countries of the Buddha. Would the world honored one please explain for the Bodhisattvas the practices by which a land is purified? So it says here the countries of the Bodhisattvas. So this is not usually the language you see in the sutras. So here it's talking about the Buddha lands or the pure lands of the Buddhas is what it's talking about. So the Buddha said, excellent jewel accumulation. You are able to inquire on behalf of the Bodhisattvas regarding the practices by which the Tathagata purified his land. Listen clearly, and consider this well. I will explain it for you. At this, jewel accumulation and the 500 elder sons listened as instructed. So, first looking at the form of the question, he doesn't ask just for himself, he asks on behalf of everyone that's present. So normally we don't do that. We have a question because we want the answer, or we ask the question why. I want to see if this person knows anything. Sometimes we ask in a challenging way, or in a way that makes us look good, or as we, I think, see more and more, we ask questions just as a means to embarrass someone. We don't really want the answer, or if it goes beyond a soundbite, people zone out. So this is a bit different. It also means that jewel accumulation has done some homework. He doesn't ask just a random question. He's come with a question that's incredibly important to what's happening right then. So under the canopies, all the Pure Lands have been assembled. So he asks, basically, how do you create a Pure Land? How do you get those? So it says, by what manner is your land purified? But in essence, he's asking, on one hand, why so many? How are they formed? For what purpose are they formed? What is this display? Which is, of course, probably on everyone's mind, like, whoa.
What is this all about?
Yeah, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Whoa. Yeah. So you have that, really, but not in like a, what is this? But like a, please explain now. And he asked not only, again, please explain for the bodhisattvas the practice by which a land is purified. So not just for us, but for the bodhisattvas as well, right? How is a land purified? So that's the basis of the question. So how is the land purified? Where are they? Why are they here? What do they do? Is the question. Which is actually a fascinating question because we see Pure Lands come up. We have a whole school of Buddhism, Pure Land School, and that's the focus. And I can't recall the discussion of where Pure Lands come about and how you get one. In most of the sutras, the discussion is a foretelling of one of the students' futures, where the Buddha says, in the future you will attain enlightenment, your name will be this, and your Pure Land will be called that. But, I have one. Do I have to have one? Do I just get keys to a Pure Land when I'm awarded the Buddhahood? Like, how does that work? So that's the answer to the question here. So it's actually quite fascinating. So the Buddha answers, of course. Jewel accumulation. The categories of sentient beings are the bodhisattvas' Buddha lands. The categories of sentient beings are the Pure Lands. Which means Pure Lands aren't something that Buddhas make and sit back and wait for people to move in. We've got some nice condos here in the Pure Land. I've got some beachfront property. No, right? So the qualities of sentient beings manifest the Pure Land. So he'll go into detail. Bodhisattvas acquire the Buddha lands, their Pure Lands, according to sentient beings that they convert. They acquire the Buddha lands according to the sentient beings they discipline. They acquire the Buddha lands according to what country sentient beings need to enter into Buddha wisdom. They acquire the Buddha lands according to what country sentient beings need to generate the roots for becoming bodhisattvas. Why is this? Because bodhisattvas' acquisition of pure countries, and again, countries are a little confusing, so the Pure Lands. The acquisition of Pure Lands is entirely for the benefit of sentient beings. It is like a man who wants to build a palace on empty land. Who is able to build it? Accomplished to this wish without hindrance. He would never be able to build it in space. Bodhisattvas are like this. In order to accomplish the salvation of sentient beings, they vow to acquire the Buddha countries. They vow to acquire a Buddha land is not done in empty space. So you don't get enlightened and say, I think I'll make a Pure Land. It's only created in response to the need of people. So someone, let's say in the future you're enlightened and you are the Buddha Fema, and you only create a Buddha land in response to a natural disaster, right? You don't create one and then move it around to the disaster. You go to where the disaster is, and you set up shop there to help people there because they have a need. And when that need is no longer there, when they've rebuilt their homes, poof, it goes away. So they're situational. There is a relation between the need and the Pure Land. But he does get several types. So if we give into, it's kind of broken into 5 components. So we'll go through those. How does a Buddha get a Pure Land? So the Pure Land depends quite literally on its existence on sentient being that it aims to convert. So if Doug is the Buddha, then he's got to create a Pure Land for each one of us. That's different because we have different needs. So his Pure Land isn't based specifically on him. It's based on the needs of people. Or it's because people have generated a specific practice and have made a connection to that Pure Land, like Amida. And therefore, they have rebirth in that Pure Land. But that Pure Land, that scenario is also anticipated. Because I was like, but wait, what about, it's further. So it's, I don't like the word convert here.
Yeah.
So let me explain that. So convert probably has the conversion of something to something else, not from one religion to another. So support, aid, assist, or transform. So the process of transforming. So it's not converting people from other religions. It's, you're very naughty and we're transforming you. We're converting that into oxygen into hydrogen, right? Component parts. So that's a little, language can be, translations are not always perfect. So without sentient beings in need, there would be no Pure Land, is what this is getting at. And the specific characteristics of the Pure Land depend entirely on the specific need of the sentient beings. So it's a very organic association, right? It is a refugee camp at this point. But the purpose here is transformational. Once you're transformed, it goes away. What are the qualities of this Pure Land? Whatever you need to be transformed. So that's the first one.
So does that sort of in the same sort of sense as each sentient being, when he's being spoken present, it is unique to him and feels like he's speaking directly, and there's a Pure Land or whatever that's there for him.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of interesting because some of the holy mountains in Asia were considered to be Pure Lands because they had a transformational quality. So it had that idea. They're not established just for, if Congress wanted to give me a mountain to establish a monastery. Right? We don't have emperors to give away mountains anymore. But I'm not going to say, yeah.
They're giving up to somebody else.
Yeah. So they'll probably figure out that there's like something to be mined or drilled there, so they'll take it back. If I get the mountain, I'm not going to say, okay, great, I'm going to build a house with a great view and that's it, right? The purpose would be for people to come and practice. So it's going to be established in a way that's most beneficial for people to come and use it, not to keep people out and make it, my electrified fence or something, Dobermans. Leave me alone. I want my peace and quiet. That's not the point. So the second characteristics of the creation of a Pure Land is, according to sentient beings, they discipline. So this also sounds kind of like school principal. You're being disciplined, but here discipline has the idea of teaching to the point where people have a very firm understanding of the underlying meaning of the teaching. So probably a better word than discipline would be, those engaged in very deep study. So this may be like a more fine-tuned Pure Land, where you have already been transformed. You're firmly on the path, but you're engaged in graduate study, right? Everyone's writing their dissertation in this Pure Land. It's a very, we know what we need to do, but we're doing very deep research. So this would be the research lab rather than the undergrad campus. they use it. It also, though, when there's a hint here of this level having to do not just with, again, people, but with other classes of beings. How do you transform them? Because other classes of beings are more subtle than us. We're very heavy and gross, dense. Others are much lighter, energetic. So there's that sense to this too. The third one, entry into the Buddha's wisdom. So again, it uses the word country here. So we're Pure Land, not country. So not in terms of national borders, but wisdom and awareness. Right? So there's entry into this deeper level mastering of the Buddha's discerning wisdom. So what were the 10 powers? What kind of discerning wisdom does the Buddha have? Getting into that level of insight, right? So you have a Pure Land that's focused on that. So who gets into that Pure Land? Probably, 8th stage bodhisattvas, right? So this is postdoctoral work for bodhisattvas, right? Even higher level. What is there? Whatever is needed to arouse their faculties, right? So it's going to be different for each bodhisattva even. So what do you need to sort of sweep away that last bit of dust? That's what's in this Pure Land. So it's ideal practice space. In many ways I could say this is probably even just, this is a Pure Land that could probably be a lecture. It's manifested for the duration of the lecture or duration for the practice time, and then it goes away. I've been very lucky to be able to, spend time on Koyasan or other, places and meditate on mountains, and you have that sense, I think, sometimes of like, oh, this is the Pure Land. This is perfect, This is exactly what I need right now, and it sticks out. I meditated once on Mount Lassen down in California. Very beautiful. And one side of Mount Lassen is sort of like Yosemite. There's this really long cliff, kind of dangerous. So hike with a buddy. But when you're there, you look out into the Central Valley and 6,000-7,000 feet up, and it's just beautiful. But having that vista, that viewpoint, was, as somebody coming from the Midwest, which is very flat, that was one of the first times I had that kind of panoramic view from such a height. And there's the air quality, the sound is different, the birds are down there. Everything is different. So I remember it was very impactful. So perhaps that's momentarily that meditation is a Pure Land, because it's transformative. And literally my viewpoint was completely changed for the first time. So visit Mount Lassen if you have a chance. Very beautiful. So I think another way you can look at this is why the different levels. In many ways, you can think of this like the military, right? Everybody in the military goes through basic training. Then they may go through some specialty training. Then some select few are going to go, special forces, and that's more rigorous training. Others are going to go to officer candidate school. And then there's probably other advanced schools that are within them. You don't just become a general automatically. I'm sure there's more education in college that's associated with it. But there's certain things that are common to everyone, and certain things that are specialized knowledge for others. So each Pure Land kind of has that quality, and the Buddha's manifested as they're needed. But it's very interesting because, again, it gets down to the underlying energy for everything the Buddhas do, for the Bodhisattvas do, is compassion. So if you, even your Pure Land must be manifested for the benefit of others. It can't be just this wonderful place that you sit and enjoy. And a lucky few wander in, you're like, okay, you can luxuriate in my Pure Land, right? It's specifically for them. And so it has nothing to do with your own enjoyment. It may have a causal connection to your method of teaching or how you personally became enlightened, which makes sense. That's why people have an affinity with it. But it is not, maybe we may jump to the conclusion that it's somehow a reward for becoming enlightened. Oh, I get a Pure Land. That's great. You know, I'm going to have a chocolate fountain in all of my Pure Land. Right. It's not for your enjoyment. It's strictly for transformation of others, and then when that need is no longer there, it's no longer needed. So that's why at the beginning it says it's like, you know, in the same way a person can't build a house in space. There has to be a foundation. That foundation is the need for people. So I think we'll do the next portion next week because we're out of time.
Or in the new year, actually.
Yes. So next year. If you'll be here, we will have open house New Year's Day service and blessing. So come. There'll be snacks and tea, and I will have the heat on. Because last year it was very cold. So hopefully we won't have the same sub-freezing temperatures on New Year's Day. But and then next year, field trips to Seattle and Hawaii and hopefully Japan. So join us. More information to come. So.
Koyasan, or what are you aiming for?
Right now I'm thinking tour of Kyoto and then Koyasan also. So 2 years ago we did the first few temples of the Shikoku pilgrimage. We did day trips to Kyoto, visit Mount Hiei, as well as Mount Koyasan. But this time I think it'd be better to do a little bit less back and forth travel. So spend most of the time in Kyoto and see a lot of the representative temples and areas, and then probably 2 nights on Koyasan again. So you need at least that much time to see the mountain, visit the temples. You have at least 2 opportunities to go to the morning service, and then the museum and things like that. And I like to give people time to just wander, see what speaks to you, and walk around, and you know, have no rush, just explore. So that's kind of the plan. But it's easy to fly into Kansai and then do that trip rather than some other area. I know I get a lot of questions like, let's go to Tokyo to eat, but well, it's a little far. So
there's food in Kyoto too.
Yeah. The food in Osaka is actually the best, but and of course, you know, free day for shopping and bringing back gifts for people. So I learned long ago there has to be the gift shopping time too.
Omiyage time.
Yes, omiyage time. We'll have that. So I'm thinking late fall, maybe end of October, beginning of November. So we'll see. I'll start coordinating with the travel agent. So it'll be open to the world. The more the merrier. It's good.
Yeah.
But going to Koyasan especially, it's good opportunity. Good opportunity.